I love that you're trying to create a material that people can learn from and figure out because it's like, I think we've all had some of those experiences where, we may have a coworker where you hear a thing and you never had that relationship and you feel bad and you want to say something, but you don't know what to say. And of course, you're guaranteed to get your foot in your mouth because, there is no space to have this conversation. There is no training. So I want to have a moment of grace for us because guarantee you, I've been that guy.
Welcome to Say This, Not That, your guide for what to say and what to avoid when people are grieving, struggling, or simply going through life's tougher moments. Welcome. I am so appreciative of you guys joining. So, maybe we start off with just a brief introduction. I've got Julie and Jaiah Kamara here with me today, dear friends and Minnesota residents. But I wonder if each of you might just offer a little bit of an intro of what do you think it's important for folks to know about what persona you're showing up with here today.
Sure. Julie Kamara, as you noted, I was born and raised in Minnesota, did a short stint away in Atlanta post-college graduation, and then ventured back to the lovely state of Minnesota with Jaya. And we've been married here for 18 years already and have two beautiful tween and teenage children, Audrey, who's 14, and Isaac, who is 11. And personally, love personal growth, running, reading, connecting with others. It's me in a nutshell.
All right.
Thank you.
Uh, Hello, all. My name is Jai Kamara. I was actually born and raised in Monrovia, Liberia, but I've been here in Minnesota ever since, going back to like 1990. I would tell people that I am a proud father of two and loving husband, and in my time away from work, I like to think about how am I using my experiences, both with kids and friends, to sort of share my stories and help people learn from my journey along the way. So, hoping to share stories to help people learn and move forward in their own lives.
Thank you very much. I will say, for context for folks, I got to know Jaya and Julie many years ago because Jaya's sister and I had been roommates back in graduate school, and we got to be very dear friends. And we might come around to talk about this later, but she later on was diagnosed with a rare cancer. And so I feel like I was welcomed into their family and sort of as a dear friend of his sister's. We sort of have been through quite a bit in terms of showing up for one another during the course of that journey. And then eventually after she had passed away. And so there's a lot of history with this group, and then I know that it'll make for a really good conversation. But with that, I like to kind of jump in on these discussions and actually start with what's something that was really helpful. So I wonder if whichever one of you wants to start, maybe you can set the stage for us of like what was a situation that you found yourself in. Again, could be challenging, maybe could be something that was unexpected, but where somebody said something or did something for you that really made an impact, a positive impact, and they whether it was just like the right thing at the right time that they said or the right thing that they did in the way that they showed up, that you thought, gosh, that was memorable and super helpful, and that you've somehow learned from that and taken it forward with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I go back to a moment during COVID, and I think back at that period of time. You know, immediately before COVID, I think about my life, and I was in a stage of my professional career that I was saying yes to everything. I was saying yes to, yes, I will be on the school board. Yes, I will go coach youth sports. Yes, I will lead with the Black Employee Resource Group. And it was just this moment where I wanted to seize every moment and every opportunity to learn and grow. And I remember when COVID hit and the pressures of COVID, and I'll acknowledge that immediately before COVID, I had recently lost my dad, not long before that, losing my sister, Fatma. And, I came to acknowledge that I had a lot of unprocessed grief in my life. And when COVID hit, I remember having this moment of sort of needing to withdraw. needing to sort of say, "Oh my God, I can't do the board thing. I can't do all of these things. I just need to take care of myself." And I remember having the sense of failure and disappointing people to need to pull back. I wasn't worried about, hey, I need to deal with my own mental health. I was worried about, I'm going to disappoint. I'm going to need to walk away from people who I've been helping because I need to take care of myself. And I'll never forget it. I have a mentor in my life who has always sort of been this big sister figure to me. And she was the leader of the organization I was a part of. And I remember being really sad and scared to call her and let her know I need to step down, that I can't do this right now. And I'll never forget it. And I remember calling her and speaking to her and her telling me that's okay. And that blew my mind. And not to say that it shouldn't, and we should not assume that something as simple as that would be so powerful, but she gave me the grace I did not know how to give myself in that moment. In that moment that I needed time to heal and step away, I did not deem it as easy or okay for me to quit the things that I was doing in that moment. And she kind of gave me that grace and space to just go nurture and take care of myself, and needed to, and sad to say that I needed to hear that, but in that moment that was something that I needed to hear. And so now as I work with people who go through their own mental challenges and struggles in life, and being able to, give people the grace that they need and give them the space, and really taking a posture of none of this matters. Like, what do we need to do to take care of you? How can I help you, support you to take care of what you need to do, and sort of all the things that kind of go along with that. But that was one of the most impactful ways where, that was something that was just what I needed to hear, and it was just the right thing to say. And I've seriously taken that with me as I now deal with other people who have their own mental health struggles.
Thank you for sharing, and how great of her to really listen and pay attention to where you were at that time and where you were in that moment, and to, as you said, have the grace to have that reaction and to be focused on you and your needs, and not maybe necessarily her and her needs, or what the organization might have needed at that time, or what the impact would have was going to be in the near term, but really to think about that bigger picture of really caring about you and your well-being, and being able to take that beat and say okay
Yeah,
on your behalf.
yeah, it was quite impactful to me at that moment. So
That's great. How about you, Julie?
Yeah, this moment was not necessarily about what someone said, but it was what someone did. And it might sound a little cliche in the role that a parent plays, but when I was in my junior year of college, I decided to study abroad for a summer. And this was something that never would have been feasible or even thought of. I never traveled outside of the US prior to this, did not have those types of opportunities growing up, and I was very supported by my parents. But not only that, my mom took the journey with me. She took the leap and she came and visited me by herself, flew to meet me in the Charles de Gaulle airport. That's where I went and picked her up. And at that point in time, there were no cell phones, or she didn't have a working cell phone that worked outside of the country. So it was that her getting outside of her comfort zone and supporting me, and we were able to have this incredible journey together that meant so much to me. And I think it's just, or actions sometimes speak louder than words. And that was a big one for me. And if you ask her about that experience, she lost it when she saw me in the airport, because Charles de Gaulle is not small. And so she saw me finally around the corner and just broke down. So that vision will always be in my memory.
What a touching moment. What a special thing for her to do, and clearly an indelible memory that you've
Mhm.
carried with you. I wonder if something comes to mind for either of you out of those experiences that they've inspired you to then do going forward. And maybe you could think of an example where that energy from that particular experience fueled you to do something for somebody else.
You want to take the lead?
Yeah, I think in general, it's kind of paved that way for me, continuing to get out of your comfort zone, do the things. Life is short. So kind of going against what Jaya's advice was of not saying yes to everything, but really saying yes to those meaningful moments.
Yeah, I take from my experience again is mental health is so important, and I think the loss that I've had since losing my dad and my sister, and really kind of dealing with that grief, and then how that impacted me coming into COVID has really had me really being a champion for mental health today. And as a person who believes in the impact of therapy, as a person who believes in the impact of being open about, like being willing to talk about mental health and being willing to talk about getting help and being able to be present when someone's sort of expressing their grief and not trying to solve it and change it, but really just being present and being there for them has really had an impact. And it's really made me more aware now as a people leader and having a large team. And you know, everyone's got their grief and everyone's got their struggles that they carry with them every single day, and being able to recognize when someone might be going through something, and really kind of creating a space to listen and support them. It's really transformed how I sort of show up as a person and trying to be more supportive to people and their own mental health journeys, and trying to figure out just how to be present and supportive to what people may need.
That's so important. It strikes me that you bring up COVID and the experiences that you shared really came to a head in COVID. And when we step back and look at that, that was a time of shared grief in so many ways for everyone at the same time globally. More people not only lost family members and loved ones throughout that time, but also lost a lot of different kinds of things and had a very visceral experience of it. Jai, you talked about losing your sister and your dad. And so, by way of context for listeners, so Fatma was Jaya's sister. We were roommates in business school and very dear friends. And part of what woke me up to this whole concept was when she had a rare cancer diagnosis. And at the time, I would do my best to be an advocate, going to doctor's appointments, taking notes, trying to just be supportive. And I noticed among our friend group, some people really didn't know what to say and just shied away. Some people kind of stopped showing up in some cases. And in other cases, some people that I might have thought would do better just said stuff that was, I think, unintentionally insensitive. A lot of, oh, well, this happened for a reason. This is all part of God's plan, or you just need to stop eating insert XYZ, because that's what cured my uncle, my sister, my grandparent, etc. And I just remember looking at Fatma in a lot of cases, her rolling her eyes or just needing to shrink the circle to people who just had a different level of understanding or were able to manage the energy a little bit differently. And frankly, thinking, whoa, I mean, that's got to be really hard to hear. And here I am just walking alongside somebody not, battling cancer myself, for example. And so whether it was dealing with illnesses, which I think is so real for so many people, and or grieving death. Maybe we start with illness and then we move on. Maybe you could share some examples of a time that somebody said something that you couldn't believe and how, that has perhaps set you on a path to do the opposite.
Yeah, I'll say, like, to have a moment of grace for people who enter those spaces who don't know how to be in those spaces, right? There's just, like, let's just own it. There's just a sense of I don't even say awkwardness, or but yeah, as a human who is not as close, or who may not be as close, and don't want to say, like, I love that you're doing this podcast. I love that you're trying to create a material that people can learn from, and figure out, because it's like I think we've all had some of those experiences as well too, where we may have a coworker where you hear a thing and you never had that relationship, and you feel bad and you want to say something, but you don't know what to say. And of course, you're guaranteed to get your foot in your mouth because, there is no space to have this conversation. There is no training. There is no, and usually when you sometimes would hear about those things, it might be in the moment. So if you've never had a training or a hand guide, and this is not a traditional thing that a person would have that preparation for. So I want to have a moment of grace for us because guarantee you, I've been that guy. And
Oh,
and
I've been that person too. I think we all have. I was talking to somebody the other day and we acknowledged that even if and when you know about this stuff, it still takes practice. And it doesn't mean that you're going to execute every time. I think about it like no athlete, makes 100% of the baskets that
yeah,
they shoot, right? No baseball player hits 100% of the pitches. And so I think it's, work in progress. You could try to improve your average, but I'm really glad you said that, Jaya, because I
yeah.
think having a moment of grace broadly is so important.
The worst moment I've had for a bit of levity with this is, I had a classmate once who I knew had gone through some health stuff and also had also delivered a baby. It had been a while since I had seen them. And in seeing them, I led with, can't believe I led with, when is the baby due? And she had already delivered, and I didn't know if it was something. So it's just like, in the reality of say this and not that, that is a textbook. If I had to highlight a single moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I had never said that, that is one of those things. I just want to pause and just say thank you for creating the space for the dialogue, and also in grace for those that come into it that just don't know what to say. So yeah, I'll pause on that.
Well, I also want to reinforce the point that you made, which I think is it's really sensitive around pregnancies. And Julie, maybe you can comment on your own experiences as a mom of two, but always err on the side of saying less and making no assumptions and probably fewer questions. The best example that I have as a leader at work is anytime a woman would come in and say that they were expecting, I would always pause, and the first words out of my mouth would be, first of all, congratulations. And so something that would acknowledge that this was a moment for them and that they were choosing to share it and what it was all about. And it's sensitive. All these things are sensitive. And so I just like to air as many ideas as possible for people to learn from and then navigate what their own style might be. But I'm sure you have thoughts on this one, Julie.
Yeah, I mean, the parenting aspect of it, I think particularly for mothers, everybody has advice to share, things you're doing wrong. Maybe you should think about doing it this way. Have you ever tried this? And especially in those early moments, all you want is support or somebody to listen to, validation of you're doing it as good, the best that you can. And I just feel like often people are very quick to share their own personal experiences versus recognizing where you are in the moment and what you may need, especially in those vulnerable times.
No
Chris,
mishaps for you while you were in either of your pregnancies? You came out
Nothing
unscathed?
that's like that stuck with me anyway, no.
Good.
Chris, if I may, I've got a my mother and Julie story. I don't know how well she remembers when we were newly home from the hospital with the baby, and my mom came to visit, and she had every bit of advice to offer to Julie. And I think we had probably not been home more than 48 hours. And I just remember Julie coming to me in the kitchen, just being like, "Get your mother." Because again, my mom has all the advice of all the things to do and all the ways to make it work, and just the boundaries and the space did not exist. And as a new mom in just fresh hours of being home, it was quite a comical moment. So, but that's one of those
Yeah,
for
she was
sure
very
that
much
stuck with me.
quick to share her help with words, not necessarily help with actions or anything that was actually helpful.
I think that's a point that I want to reinforce as well, which is it's not always just the words, sometimes it's the actions too. And as much as this is say this, not that, you could think of it as a do this, not that too. And I tend to think about the idea of how do you, whenever possible, unburden the person that you're trying to be supportive of, where sometimes it's easier to just go move the laundry from the washer to the dryer, go pick up some takeout food and drop it off. Do your best guess at what they might want, as opposed to asking them which of these three restaurants you want to go to, and then the menu and all the other questions. How do you sort of take the decision making load off of the person that you might be trying to be helpful to, and act and really the other part to think about is we talk about what to say, what to do, but also just to be. Like I found for me personally that sometimes people just being there and showing up and saying, I have no idea what to say, but how about we just, I'm here and
Yeah.
I'm going to be here.
Chris, to that point, one of the best lessons I got from my late sister, and it actually came up to me last week, just for your listeners to know, her birthday was last week, and on her birthday, my mom, uncle, and I went to go visit her at the cemetery. And I remember a lesson she taught me in the final days when she was on home hospice. And I remember, sitting there alone with her and just feeling a need to want to make it okay, feeling a need to want to make it better, just wishing I had the words to make her feel better. And she saw me trying to fill the void of that empty silence, of that empty space with words. And to me, I struggled sitting there in that moment. I struggled with just wanting to make it be better for her and knowing that we're literally here on hospice, borrow time. And she took my hand and she said, "You don't have to say anything. Like, it's okay for us to sit in silence." And she said to me, "Try to be okay with the silence." And I, before that moment, didn't get it. And now, Chris, I promise you, every time I go to the cemetery, I actually, I don't look to say words to her. I don't. My favorite way to use the time when I'm at the cemetery is to just be there in silence, and really just try to be open to that space. And now I take comfort in it. And even now as an adult, it's, I find more and more moments to sort of like embrace it, and I totally credit it to her. But I think that's one of the things that your listeners need to sort of like can appreciate is when you're in those moments, if you don't know what to say, the silence is okay. And I'm sure my wife is chuckling hearing me say this, because I'm sure she wishes I would go for that silence with us a lot more. But
It's funny you say that, Jai. Just the other night, I was in bed with, it was either, I think it was Isaac. I was like, your dad talks a lot, like always talking. So yes, those moments of silence are appreciated when they do happen.
yeah, well, I aspire and work to it, but it's literally overcoming my own instincts and life habits. And so, but I think that lesson became most valuable to me, and in that. And so I share that especially for people who, going back to when you're in the presence of someone who is ill or going through that suffering, you know, it doesn't need to be everything will be okay. You don't need to highlight a silver lining. It's just sort of a form of acceptance, and really just being open to that person's moment.
Yeah. Any thoughts for you, Julie, on those experiences when you've been accompanying people that are battling something, or that you may have felt yourself in battling different illnesses?
My dad had a stroke back in 2019, and that was a moment where the doctor told my mom, be prepared. It's highly likely he's not going to make it. So just remember being in that moment. My mom is not the best communicator, so she actually worked through her best friend to tell my siblings and I, but sitting with her in the hospital, And being in the room, I was like, "Mom, you take some space from Dad. I'll be in the room with him as he's in the urgent care at Mayo after he was transported, and it was by far the worst night of my life, but wanted to give her that space and give her the grace of I knew it was a lot for her and just taking that on for her, and it's okay. But, yeah, it's really hard to know how to be there in those moments. For those of you who don't know my father, he's since spent a lot of time in rehab. We have some long-term things that he's still dealing with, but by far is back into a very, really healthy space now. So we actually got through all of that, and he's in a really great place, but it was a rough time, and I think, yeah, it's how do you support those closest to us as well as the broader community, feeling like you need to also be there for the community when you yourself are like, "I don't know what I need to do, or how do I take care of myself and my immediate family?" So it's tough. So I would just say be yeah, I think Jaya shared too. It's just like, how do we recognize the grace we need to give ourselves, the grace that we need to give others? Nobody's gonna navigate these things perfectly, and that's okay.
Yeah, very, very well said. Are there things that you all feel like what comes to mind, Julie, as you were telling that is that we all have these encounters in life where sometimes it may be something that we ourselves are going through, sometimes it might be an immediate family member is going through, and then it sort of moves outwards, right? It might be extended family or dear friends or neighbors or classmates, et cetera, or coworkers. And so there's almost sort of like those rings of the degree of intimacy that you might have with the people that are experiencing stuff. And so if you're that person, right, in this case, you showing up for your dad, Julie, to give some relief for your mom, then presumably who's supporting you, right? Like there's Jaya there to be able to be a support network for you and a release valve. And sometimes the way I think about it is, okay, well, then how am I creating space to let other people recharge or re energize or let go? If they have to be the person being strong for somebody, who do they get to
Mhm.
unload on? To a
Mhm.
certain extent, and how do we think about that? I don't know if you guys think about it that way, or if you've found that helpful as you've encountered these experiences.
Yeah, I would say it can get lonely as you're going through those moments, as well, of like, how do you then reach out for the support that you need? And then how do you then let those other people be that support for you? I know I am a pretty stubborn person myself and don't always like to ask for help. So I think there's a little bit of onus on how do you open yourself up to ask for help then too, also when you need it.
It's funny you say that because as you told that story, I was not the best that I could have been for her. And when I think about the challenge that she went through, and this is just a learning for all in hindsight, because for one, I'm an over communicator. My wife is the far inverse. And so as she goes through some of those challenges, she internalizes, and so it's like it's really important as you go through those things as partners, being able to explicitly communicate what help do you need, like what do you need. So as you are going through a thing of caring for partners or caring for an external family member, being able to say, here's what I need, and because I as an individual, and I'll own it, am not always best on picking up like the cues or assuming or figuring out what those things to be. And I'm an individual who benefits directly from explicit, here's what I need. And if that is communicated, I will do those things. And so, we have been through a lot through our 18 years of marriage, and we continue to sort of get better at these things. And when we've gone through those trying times, and I'll say this to the listeners, if you are a person was going through that really, really hard thing and you're needing to care for someone else, you do need your own support. And whomever you have around you does need to be able to give you the space to enable you to go do what you need to go do to support that person who's in need of that care. And so, you know, if you're in that sort of partnership, it's a partnership together for one person to sort of say, let me give you the space for you to go take care of whatever you need and let everything else go. And as partners, if you need to say explicitly tell me what you need, or being so it's just one of those things where you, unless you've been taught it, you have to go through it and figure it out. And so how do you have the space and grace for everyone involved to be able to go do that? Because that is a real life thing.
Yeah, it's tough too if you aren't quite sure what you need. I feel like that's been the case for me
Yeah, that's
sometimes. If
a
I've
great
been
point.
showing up for friends or family members and I know I just need some space and time, but sometimes I don't know maybe what else or what else would be a relief thing. But I also think sometimes, especially in your if you're in a health situation, like one of my parents was in the hospital unexpectedly, and so I was working with caregivers and then communicating back to my other family members and just kind of on, and then I find myself to be like on for a period of time, and then when the situation is more handled and the patient is stable and maybe home from the hospital, it's kind of like then you can really release, but then it's even more important to pay attention to, like, okay, wait, how else
Hmm.
do I need to recharge? Or, oh wait, then I'm going to start crying about something and realizing the true impact of the moment, and okay, who
Yeah,
am I going to call to maybe debrief about this or
Hmm.
process it?
that's such a valid point as far as saying, as your person, you're the person going through it. 100% true. You don't know what you need in that as well too. So yeah, so thank you for calling that out. I mean, that is a real thing. So it's like, how do you create that space for that as well too?
You all find that spirituality plays a role for you in circumstances like this? And if so, what role might that play? Spirituality, maybe prayer, particularly, or maybe none of the above?
Um, it's interesting. It does play more of a role with me. Yeah, I would say as an individual, I'm on my journey with my own spirituality, and I find myself more drawn in those moments and speaking and trying to have a conversation with God. And I find myself more drawn in those moments. But I think my conversation with God in those moments is more about one, you know, I want to pray for healing. I want to pray for peace for the person who's going through it. And at the same time, ask for just strength for me to do what I need to do to kind of get through it, because it's hard and yeah, it's those are the moments where I'm like, I don't think I can do it on my own, and meaning as a human without that spirituality. So
Yeah, for me, it feels like the like that reflection that there is a higher power that's there for us that can always be that. And as Jai indicated, I'm much more of an internal processor so for me, it's helpful to be able to have those almost internal dialogue, but have that reassurance, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's super helpful. I bring it up because I'm always curious to hear different experiences, and I find that I learn from different experiences a lot of times. Just to share on behalf of myself, I found that I think that there's real power in prayer and prayer of other people on behalf of you and or your loved ones. And so I'm always grateful when people are saying, I'm praying for you. And I know that doesn't land the same way for everybody. So that could be a maybe not say this, say that,
For
like
sure.
have some sensitivity to that because that may land differently for certain people. For me, it happens to land well. And then I always learn from, I think back to Jai, you were telling stories about your sister Fatma. She was a great extemporaneous prayer person and would say like, let's pray, and then offer up a prayer that was not some rote written thing but was something that she felt called to say in the moment. And I've encountered a few other people like that over the years, and I'm always impressed by that because that is not me. My prayers are usually more silent and in conversation with God. But what I've learned to do is just to go along with that. And the more I listen to and stay in the moment with those folks, I'm always somehow grateful for their willingness to be vulnerable and offer that up, and let it have its own impact and have the great, and hopefully it connects. But listen, I've been in the rooms where some people think they're going to pray something away that is unrealistic too, and it doesn't land. So I think it's a good example of, with all of these things, we go back to your point at the outset, Jaiah, of how do you have grace? How do you have grace in all of these circumstances? Because none of us are going to be perfect with any of
I
it.
think you
Yeah, when I think about the praying for someone to heal entirely versus um uh I don't, I don't know. It's again going back to my own sort of like journey with faith and believing in a greater uh uh, believing in a greater power, believing in God. And sometimes when I think of all those who sort of suffer and suffer through things, and thinking like I've created separation from, is it fair for me to sort of pray and say that this goes away? And I do pray that things like go away. And but for the moments that they don't, and I get, like, and again, like praying with my sister as she went through cancer, and we prayed that she would heal and bounce back from it, and losing her through that. It's sort of the when I pray, it's I've almost found my prayer been modified through her loss. And what I mean by that, it's not fair for me to expect that it will go away. Or it's not fair that like I don't want to put the expectation that because I pray for it, it will go away. If that sort of like makes sense. And it's more about praying for the healing, praying for peace for that individual through it. I don't know. It's something for me to sort of like come back to, but like when I meet with people who are going through things and entering prayer, I recognize that that experience I went through with my sister, and trying to have sort of a separation of what will make this go away versus helping through it. I don't know. I don't mean for the rant. It's just it's we've touched on something that I'm recognizing that I'll have to figure out. So
You were going to say something, Julie?
Yeah, you had made a comment too around recognizing that that may not be the right solution, or people may not receive that in the same way that you do. And I just think, especially in the corporate environment, or how heightened things are just in general for everybody, being really cognizant and trying to do adjust that, not knowing how people are going to receive it, of sending positive thoughts, or and then in your mind, if you know that individual would receive it in a way that's positive, then you could share. But that's one thing that I try to be really cognizant of at this point in time in bringing up religion and or name the thing.
sort of the
Yeah.
response of people saying thoughts and prayers when you hear of a situation that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. This has been super helpful. I appreciate you all sharing anecdotes. Are there any other things that you think you want to make sure to leave us with? Is there a particularly good example of, whether it's a note that you received or sent, or another action, or just some other parting thought that, if I were to come and say, listen, I'm working on this project, say this, not that, that you want to make sure, you know what, tell people, fill in the blank.
I've got one, and I'll credit this to Julie for teaching it to me, especially as we raise kids, and kids in sports. One of the things that we learned to say when you watch a kid play, regardless if they did good or they did bad, that your one piece of feedback to them is, I loved watching you play. There are conversations about kids who dread getting in the car with their parent after a bad game, and them getting all sorts of feedback and dreading the ride home. And I know I've had my moments of being guilty of that. And so one of the things that I'm trying to learn and working on, that I learned from Julie, is just reinforcing that I loved watching you play.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think it's what I both at home and in the office or at work is coming in a little bit with a coaching mindset, so not coming in with the answers and or advice, but really asking those thought-provoking questions. If you were to interview our daughter, she would probably share that oftentimes I'm asking her, "Well, what do you think?" or something along those lines versus she wants me to just say, "No, just tell me what to do or what to say," versus making me think more about it. So I would definitely lead in with that on oftentimes you get a lot more fruitful dialogue, conversation, you get a lot more out of relationships if you come in with that coaching mentality.
Fantastic. Super helpful. Any watch outs? Any avoid this? Never again?
Well, I was prepping for this. One of the stories that has stuck with me since very, very early on in my career as a what not to say or what not to do. And I struggled a lot early on in our marriage. We came in at a time I think the economy wasn't so great. So it took us a minute to find our footing in our careers. And I was having a networking conversation with an individual at Target, and I was so intimidated coming in because Target headquarters, there's a lot of you probably felt this at General Mills, Chris. It's a lot of that up and coming, kind of fashion forward, just like high profile people is what I felt like at the time. And I'm coming in and probably the opposite of that and super intimidated. And I'm meeting with this individual, and I cannot remember his name, but he's asking me what I'm looking for and then what compensation. And I shared with him what I was making at my what I felt like was an okay entry level job, and he was like, "That's not even at the poverty level." It was like, talk about already feeling so low. I
What?
just walked out with like my tail, but
What?
it just felt so humiliated and so less than. So, if you're ever in those conversations with people who you're trying to build up, how do you find a way to build them up and not make them walk out feeling worse about themselves?
Yeah.
But that was the reality,
I mean, I'm sorry you went through that, and also thank you for sharing so that we can all learn from
yeah,
it and never say that.
right?
That's brutal.
Yeah. The one I'll leave you with that's more of a racial cultural thing for people to know. Just if you've ever said it, please don't ever say to a black person, "Wow, you're so articulate." That's the number of times I've heard in my life people being surprised that I'm so articulate. And just for people who are not aware about it, that is implying the natural assumption that people of color would not be articulate. So just if you've ever said it, please don't ever say it again. Just not one of those things that has the reaction that you think it does.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Strike that one from the lexicon. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a definitely not that.
Yeah, not that.
Thank you both for making the time. It's delightful to spend time with you always. And I know that your stories and examples will resonate and hopefully help a number of people as they're trying to navigate through other circumstances that they may encounter.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Say This, Not That, the podcast that helps you learn how to show up better and connect with one another in life's tough moments. If this episode gave you something to think about, hit subscribe and stick with us to learn more. Until next time.